October 2nd, 1979, Mount Everest, South Col, Nepal. A 39-year-old German woman begins her descent from the summit. She is exhausted. Her Sherpa is pleading with her to keep moving. Camp is 100 meters below. She sits down against her pack. From the first woman to die on Everest, whose body stood watch on the mountain for years, to the sleeping beauty who haunted the route for nearly a decade, to the woman whose death forced a global reckoning about who belongs on the world's highest peak. Welcome to Tourist Tragedies. Viewer discretion is advised. Hannelore Schmatz was not what most people picture when they imagine an Everest climber. She wasn't a sponsored athlete. She wasn't a professional guide. She was a housewife from Neu-Ulm, West Germany, married to Gerhard Schmatz, one of the most accomplished mountaineers in Europe, who had discovered something extraordinary in herself on the slopes of the world's highest peaks. Her husband introduced her to high-altitude climbing. They summited together year after year, Manaslu, Tirich Mir, Lhotse. She became the first German woman to climb a 7,000er. She was methodical, careful, someone who studied a mountain before she stood on it. The 1979 Swabian expedition was their biggest undertaking. 8 climbers, 5 Sherpas, Gerhard as expedition leader, and Hannelore as the only woman on the team. On October 1st, Gerhard summited at 50 years old, the oldest person to stand on Everest at that time. One day later, it was Hannelore's turn. She made it, the 4th woman in history to reach the top of the world. For about an hour, high above the clouds, life was completely perfect. Here is what most people don't understand about dying on Everest. The mountain almost never kills people on the way up. It kills them on the way down. By the time a climber reaches the summit, they have spent somewhere between 60 and 80% of their physical and cognitive reserves just getting there. The summit is not the finish line. It is the halfway point. And in the death zone, the altitude above 8,000 meters where the human body cannot acclimatize and begins slowly dying with each minute you remain, every second you are not moving downward is a second the mountain is winning. On October 2nd, 1979, Hannelore Schmatz and her climbing partner Ray Genet began their descent from the summit in the late afternoon. Genet was American, a legendary guide in Alaska, famous for leading the first winter ascent of Denali in 1967. He was as experienced as they came. Both he and Hannelore were using supplemental oxygen, but their supplies were running critically low. The sun was dropping. The temperature was falling faster than either of them could manage. Their Sherpa guide, Sungdair, urged them forward continuously. Camp 4, the South Col camp, was within sight, 100 meters below, maybe 150. They could see it. All they had to do was keep moving. They didn't keep moving. At approximately 8,400 meters, still deep inside the death zone, Genet refused to go further. He was finished. He demanded they stop and bivouac for the night. Hannelore, equally drained, agreed. Sungdair had no choice but to stay with them. The Sherpa's warnings had been explicit. Bivouacking in the death zone without a tent is not rest. It is a slow death sentence. That night, with no shelter and temperatures that can fall below -40 degrees Celsius, a brutal snowstorm moved in. By morning, Ray Genet was dead. Hypothermia had taken him during the night. Sungdair and Hannelore began moving again, one foot in front of the other. Down toward the South Col, toward Camp 4, toward safety. At approximately 8,100 meters, 100 meters above camp, Hannelore stopped. She sat down against her backpack. Her Sherpa pleaded with her to get up. She said 2 words, water, water, and then she was gone. Sungdair stayed with her as long as he physically could. When rescue teams eventually reached him, he was in critical condition. He would lose most of his fingers and toes to frostbite. He survived. Hannelore Schmatz did not. She was 39 years old. Her body was found exactly where she had sat down, frozen upright, leaning against her pack, eyes open, hair moving in the wind with every gust, as if she were still alive. For years, that image greeted every climber attempting the southern route to the summit. Norwegian expedition leader Arne Næss Jr. who passed her during a 1996 climb, wrote about it afterward. He described a woman leaning as if taking a short break on a trail, and said it felt as though she was following him with her eyes as he passed. He called her a sinister guard. Her body was a landmark, unmistakable, fixed above the South Col for the better part of a decade. In October 1984, a Nepalese police expedition was dispatched specifically to recover her remains. Police Inspector Yogendra Bahadur Thapa, 36 years old, and his guide Ong Dorji, 35 years old, fell to their deaths during the attempt. 2 people died trying to bring one woman's body down from the mountain. Her remains stayed where they were. Eventually, the wind that had moved her hair for years moved the rest of her. Her body was dislodged from the slope and swept over the edge, reportedly down the Kangshung face, and lost to the elements. After more than 2 decades as one of the most famous fixtures on the most famous mountain on Earth, Hannelore Schmatz disappeared quietly. The way most things disappear on Everest, without ceremony, all at once. Here is what I keep coming back to with Hannelore Schmatz. She was experienced. She had summited 3 peaks above 7,000 meters before she ever set foot on Everest. She knew what the death zone felt like from the inside. Her Sherpa was telling her clearly, Camp 4 is right there, 100 meters. We can make it. The standard explanation is altitude-induced cognitive impairment. At 8,000 meters, the human brain receives roughly 1/3 of the oxygen it needs to function normally. Judgment deteriorates. Decision-making becomes unreliable. The simple arithmetic of 100 more meters equals survival becomes somehow too complicated to execute. And that's probably true. It probably explains some of it. But here is what I find harder to account for. Hannelore Schmatz had the summit behind her. She had achieved the thing she came to do. And there, 100 meters from safety, with a Sherpa pointing down the slope, with camp in literal eyesight, she sat down and did not get back up. How does someone with that experience in that moment choose to stop moving? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. And maybe it's not a question with a clean answer when we're only looking at one person. But what happens when the failure isn't in the body? When someone deliberately removes every safety margin on purpose in pursuit of something specific? What happened to the next woman I'm going to tell you about might introduce another theory for what happened to Hannelore. May 22, 1998, Northeast Ridge, Mount Everest. Francys Arsentiev was born in Honolulu, Hawaii, and spent her adult life becoming someone who didn't take the route with the railing. She met her future husband, Sergei Arsentiev, in the early 1990s. He was a skilled and experienced Russian climber. She was an accomplished American outdoorswoman who had already become the first American woman to ski down Mount Elbrus, the highest peak in Europe. Together, they were a rare climbing partnership where both people were genuinely elite. They once named a previously unnamed Russian summit Peak Goodwill, a quiet Cold War gesture between 2 people from 2 countries who had found something they both loved. She wasn't climbing for a sponsorship. She wasn't climbing for television. By 1998, Francys had locked onto a specific record. First American woman to summit Everest without supplemental oxygen. No bottled air, no margin. Just her own lungs at 8,848 meters. She and Sergei set off via the Northeast Ridge, the Tibet side, in May of 1998. After 2 failed summit pushes, they began their final ascent on May 22nd. Francys reached the top. She did it. First American woman to summit Everest without oxygen. 40 years old, standing on the roof of the world. And then, she had to come back down. Climbing without supplemental oxygen doesn't just make the ascent harder. It eliminates every safety buffer on the descent. With bottled oxygen, a climber's cognition is partially protected. Their ability to regulate body temperature is slightly better. Their margin for error is wider. Without oxygen, every one of those margins disappears. And Francys had spent more than 72 hours in the death zone by the time she summited, far longer than any safe window allows. During the descent on the night of May 22nd into May 23rd, Francys and Sergei became separated in the darkness and deteriorating conditions. Sergei made it back to camp, and then immediately turned around and went back up, into the death zone to find his wife. On the morning of May 23rd, an Uzbek climbing team encountered Francys still alive on the upper slope of the northeast ridge at approximately 8,500 meters. She was half-conscious, severely frostbitten, unable to move under her own power. The Uzbek climbers gave her oxygen and managed to carry her a short distance downward, but their own supplies were exhausted, and they couldn't continue. As they descended to camp, they passed Sergei on his way back up to her. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. The following morning, May 24th, British climber Ian Woodall and South African climber Cathy O'Dowd encountered Francys on their own summit push. She was still alive, still clipped to the guide rope, lying on her side, face undisturbed, as if she were simply sleeping in the snow. They abandoned their summit attempt and spent more than an hour trying to help her. She was conscious enough to speak. She told them, "Don't leave me here." They couldn't move her. The position was too exposed, the conditions too severe. She died as they were with her. Francys Arsentiev was 40 years old. She left behind one son, Paul, who was 11 years old when his mother didn't come home. A year later, an expedition searching for the remains of George Mallory on the same face discovered Sergei's body lower on the slope, apparently killed by a fall while trying to reach his wife. He had gone back for her. The mountain didn't let him return. For 9 years, Francys lay exactly where she died, visible from the main climbing route in her bright purple jacket, her face serene, her body clipped to the fixed ropes. She became known as Sleeping Beauty. In 2007, Ian Woodall, the same man who had been forced to leave her, led a humanitarian expedition back to the mountain. He and his team wrapped Francys Arsentiev in an American flag and repositioned her body away from the climbing route to a place where no passing camera could find her. Hannelore had years of experience and made a fatal decision at the worst possible moment. Francys had extraordinary ambition and engineered a climb with no room for anything to go wrong. 2 women, 2 completely different failure modes. But neither of those explanations captures what the third case shows, because the third woman said exactly what she was thinking, out loud, before she died. May 19th, 2012, South Col, Mount Everest. Shriya Shah-Klorfine was born in Kathmandu, Nepal, in the shadow of the mountain that would eventually kill her. She was 9 years old when her father took her on a helicopter tour of Everest. She saw the summit from the air. He told her it was almost impossible to reach on foot. She never stopped thinking about that. She grew up, moved to Mumbai, worked on cruise ships, met her husband Bruce, and settled in Toronto, Canada. A businesswoman, a provincial election candidate, someone who had never made a significant mountaineering ascent in her life. She decided she was going to climb Everest. She trained for 2 years, running, hiking with heavy packs on her back. She remortgaged her home to fund the expedition. She hired a guide company called Utmost Adventure Trekking, a startup that had never guided a single client to the summit of Everest. Her dream was as real as anything. Her preparation was not enough. On the night of May 18th, 2012, Shriya Shah-Klorfine began her summit push from the South Col at 7:30 in the evening. It was one of the most congested days in Everest history. More than 200 climbers were attempting the summit in that same window. The Hillary Step, a 40-foot near-vertical rock band just below the summit, was backed up for hours. Climbers stood in the open, losing body heat, burning through oxygen, waiting for a gap to move through. Shriya was climbing too slowly. It took her 7 hours to climb the Lhotse face, roughly 2 hours longer than standard pace. Her oxygen was being consumed faster than planned because of her pace, the flow rate settings, and the sheer amount of time she had already spent above 8,000 meters. On his way down from the summit, Ganesh Thakuri, the owner of her guide company, met Shriya on the route. She was still climbing. Her oxygen was nearly gone. He told her she needed to turn around. She told him, "I spent money, and my goal is to reach the summit, and anyhow, I will go." Thakuri gave her one final oxygen bottle and let her keep climbing. After approximately 22 hours of climbing, Shriya Shah-Klorfine reached the summit of Mount Everest at 2:20 in the afternoon on May 19, 2012. She became the first woman of South Asian origin from Canada to stand on the top of the world. She celebrated. She'd done it. Then she turned to descend. She stopped moving at around 10 in the evening. Her Sherpa guides were with her at approximately 8,400 meters, just 250 meters from Camp 4. She had no oxygen left. She had been climbing for 27 hours straight with nothing in reserve. Her reported last words were, "Save me." Shriya Shah-Klorfine was 33 years old. Her body remained on the mountain for approximately 10 days before recovery climbers brought her down from above 8,000 meters to a camp within helicopter range, from where she was transported onward. Her death ignited one of the most significant public debates in Everest's modern history about commercial guiding, safety standards, and who bears responsibility when an inexperienced climber doesn't come home. Quick heads up, I drop exclusive videos you won't find anywhere else, so subscribe to be notified. 3 women, 3 summits, 3 descents that ended on the same mountain. The more I sit with these cases side by side, the harder it becomes to treat them as separate stories. Hannelore was experienced and still stopped moving 100 meters from camp. Francys was skilled and still built a climb with no margin for error. Shriya was inexperienced and still refused to turn around when a guide told her she could die. 3 different women, 3 different levels of preparation, the same outcome. Professor D. Christopher Kays at George Washington University, who spent years studying the cognitive dynamics of the 1996 Everest disaster and wrote the book Destructive Goal Pursuit, The Mount Everest Disaster, developed the concept of destructive goal pursuit. His framework offers one lens for reading these 3 cases. The phenomenon works like this. When a goal becomes sufficiently powerful and sufficiently personal, the human brain stops treating it as a means to an end. The goal becomes the only end. And everything that might compromise it, rational risk assessment, physical limits, the warnings of experienced guides, gets filtered out by a mind that has already decided how the story ends. For Hannelore Schmatz, destructive goal pursuit arrived as a crash. She had summited. The objective was achieved. And what researchers find again and again in high-altitude case studies is that the collapse of goal-directed behavior at the moment of achievement, the psychological release, combines with the physiological breakdown to create a person who simply stops. She sat down 100 meters above camp. Her brain had already decided it was over. Her body followed. For Francys Arsentiev, the goal was explicit and self-designed. Not just the summit, a specific record pursued without supplemental oxygen, which meant she had engineered every margin of error out of her own climb. She gave herself no buffer because the goal didn't allow for one. The death zone collected what was left. For Shriya Shah-Klorfine, the goal spoke for itself. My goal is to reach the summit, and anyhow I will go. It wasn't recklessness. It was something colder, a decision that had been made long before she ever arrived at base camp, that no amount of depletion or danger was capable of overriding. All 3 women reached the highest point on Earth. All 3 ran out of story before they could come back down. The mountain has no interest in where you want it to go. It only cares whether you make it home.